morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this session. My name is Kwang-jo Kim. I'm director of UNESCO office in Bangkok, which is UNESCO's Asia Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. I'm very pleased to be here to moderate this important session. Since yesterday, we've been bombarded with the few words like changes, uncertainties, crisis, etc. So indeed, we are living in a very rapidly changing world. We heard about changes in demography, technology, productive sector, in higher education, and also this forum was opened by a discussion about financial crisis, if not turmoil, which we are now experiencing. So given all these changes and uncertainties, what education can do to ameliorate the difficulties that individuals and societies are facing because of this change? Typically, in many countries, the education as a sector spends 15 to 20% of national operation budget for public education, and roughly 1/4 to 1/5 of the population are participating in education. As such, education is a huge sector, and yet education has been criticized in many countries for not being able to catch up with the changes that are taking place outside the education sector. So this session is about what education can do to prepare people, especially young people, for this changing world at the national level and at global level. So we have three prominent speakers from academia and research institute, and also we have three eminent discussants from three different international organizations. So I, as a chairman, the challenge is how I can give proper time to each of them to speak about the role of education for the changing world. In so doing, I will propose each speaker to spend 15 minutes, if you agree, for your presentation, and another 5 minutes for each discussant to reflect and to comment, to deliver their comments to the speeches. So with that, we will be able to spend about roughly an hour. And then the remaining time, I would like to encourage both speakers and discussants to interact with the participants in the floor so that we can get maximum exchange within our time limit. So before I open up for speeches, let me briefly introduce our distinguished speakers. The speaker next to my right, Dr. Hugh Loudoun, is Professor of Education and Political Economy at the University of Bath in UK. His area of expertise include relationship of education to the economy, national and corporate skills strategies. And he published many books on issues of jobs, incomes, education, and knowledge economy. Next to him, we have Dr. Greg Wang, professor of... Can anybody hear me? Thank you. Dr. Greg Wang is professor of HRD at University of Texas at Tyler, USA. His research area covers a wide range of HRD issues such as HRD management, e-learning, design, development, and implementation. Professor Wang has extensive experience in corporate world. He was worked for GE, for example, and Motorola as an HRD executive. Next to him, we have Dr. Sang-Deok Choi from Korea Educational Development Institute, a renowned education think tank here in Korea. Dr. Choi is currently a director of Research Planning Division at KEDI, Korea. He is an expert in the area of lifelong learning, human resources development, and adult education. So we have three speakers, and then next to Dr. Choi, we have eminent discussants from three different organizations. Firstly, Dr. Elizabeth King, who is currently Director of Education Department, World Bank. She is the education leader in the entire World Bank. Prior to that, she served as research manager of Human Development Department of East Asia Pacific World Bank, and she was lead economist. And prior to joining World Bank, she also taught at universities like UCLA and Tulane University in USA. Next to Dr. King, we have Dr. Mi-young Choi, who is education program specialist working at UNESCO office in Jakarta, which is UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science. Dr. Choi is science education specialist, and also she has expertise in environment education and education for sustaining development. Before joining UNESCO, Dr. Choi worked for the government of Japan in her capacity of education for sustainable development. And the last discussant, Dr. Chun-Sik Woo, many of you may know him. He is currently with OECD as a senior analyst, but basically Dr. Woo is affiliated with Korea Development Institute, or KDI, where he led many initiatives in the area of knowledge economy and knowledge partnership with many countries and World Bank. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming all the three speakers and discussants. So without further delay, may I now invite Professor Loudoun for your speech. You have 15 minutes, up to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Dr. Kim, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here and to be able to talk to you today at this very extraordinary conference. If you look at the logo here, it says it's open and ready for tomorrow. One of the ways in which we can be open and ready for tomorrow is not to tell ourselves stories that don't reflect the world. And what I want to do is to raise some fundamental questions about the stories that have been told about the promises of the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy has promised innovation. It's promised high-skilled work for all those that can have the education, can take the opportunities of education to engage in this high-skilled work. And what I and my colleague, Professor Brown, are suggesting is that this promise is in some respects false. And it's on that basis that I want to talk to you today. So my question really is one about whether education and the economy are at the crossroads. Whether there's a fundamental disjuncture or problem with the promises that education have held out for this knowledge economy. And I also want to suggest that instead of just one great crisis which we're now confronting, more indeed in the West and particularly in the United States and in Britain than in East Asia, that there are two great crises of capitalism. And the second one concerns the death of human capital in the West. Now let me be very precise about what I mean by human capital. I'm talking here about the specific theory, not the general idea that we should be upskilled in various ways through education, but the general theory which tells us that if you invest in education, then there are returns that will accrue to you in terms of work, rewarding work. And it's that particular theory that I'm interested in. Then I want to have a look at the questions of how different countries have responded to this. And I won't be able to do that in 15 minutes, but I'm quite happy to talk about those three countries, the UK, the USA, and Germany. But I want to talk about some of the fundamental principles behind that. And one of the fundamental principles is that there is a possible and very real tension between the idea of innovation and that of equity and inclusion when it comes to the knowledge economy. And if I have within this 15 minutes, 2 minutes to talk about UNESCO, the World Bank, and the developing world and the application of our particular theory and thesis to that, then I shall try and do that in an acknowledgement of those people from the World Bank and UNESCO that are here today. Okay. So since the advent of the idea of a knowledge economy, we can see that education has been seen as central to economic development. And that's been the kind of basis for all the assumptions that have been made about the knowledge economy. And there have been a number of reasons for this, and indeed I'm not going to dwell on them because they've been discussed many times already in this conference. Universities are seen to be central to innovation. It has been assumed, and this is, I think, a fundamental error, that knowledge economy increases the demands for well-paid creative knowledge workers, and that as a result, we can expect an increase in upward social mobility, and in that respect, social justice. So it's these particular assumptions I want to have a look at in greater detail. The idea that a knowledge economy requires large numbers of well-paid, creative knowledge workers is highly questionable. This is questionable in the West, and indeed even here in South Korea. When you look at your graduates, the work they do, and the degree of unemployment, you begin to ask yourself that very same question. We want to suggest also in our work that there are winners and losers in terms of those doing knowledge work, and those winners and losers may well be geographically placed so that where you can get low-paid, high-skilled work, that's where the work will gravitate to by and large. And Professor Philip Brown discussed these particular arguments and the thesis behind it yesterday evening at one of the plenary sessions. It's for this reason, then, that because of this questionable assumption, that we can refer to these two crises within Western capitalism. I won't say very much more about the three countries, simply because, as I say, I won't have time to talk about them. But just in case you are puzzled by the idea that knowledge education leads to well-paid knowledge work, I present you with data from the United States for both men and women over a period of time since 1975. And what that tells you from these graduates and non-graduates is that those at the 90th percentile, the high earners, have done extremely well, particularly since around 1990. But for the majority, they've either had decreasing wages, and these are graduates, or they've flatlined over that period of time. And Philip Brown and I have done work in Britain on this and have come up with the same conclusion. And indeed, as we'll see, that there is increasing data to challenge the idea that there are these increasing returns to education that have been assumed across pretty much the developed world. And this is for women, and what you see for women is that they don't earn as much as men, but that for those at the 90th percentile, the high earners, there has been a particular uptick. But the general point here is that at every stage, women earn less and continue to earn less than men. And this is at the center of the knowledge economy, the United States. And as I say, there is more data which continues to come in now, which suggests that the rewards to an education, higher education, are quite variable. So when we look at the question of responding, first of all, to the crises, the economic crisis in the first place, there are, I think, two ways in which policymakers have attacked this particular issue. The first is that there are changes in resourcing of tertiary education. So in the United States, more money is going in, but significantly, money is going in to the community colleges as well as the universities. And my reading, and that of Philip Brown, we've just come back from the United States, is that there is some retreat from the rhetoric of the knowledge economy there, because they're beginning to understand that the promises held out by a four-year college education no longer can be held up for all those who graduate. The second point, and I think this is an important one, and I'll refer to Germany in this context, is that there are changes in the rules by which resources are allocated. And this has a fundamental implication for issues to do with equity, as we'll see. And then fundamentally, and finally, there is a potential conflict between innovation and inclusion. What we see often is people saying, yes, very important to have innovation. Yes, it is, because of competitiveness. But if you also assume that innovation also leads to greater equity and inclusion, then I think we need to pause to think about that a bit more. So I'm going to whip through Britain and the United States and rather insouciantly Germany as well, and come to some of the general points. Let me just say something about Germany. I'll say nothing about Britain because at the moment we've retreated into a kind of neoclassical or neoliberal orthodoxy, and it's not at all clear how that country is going to move forward in the future, and the government's given no indications of how that might happen. So let me talk about Germany, a much more successful economy, of course. It has a leading sector in terms of engineering for exports. And in part of the changes in Germany has been two initiatives. One is the Excellence Initiative for universities, where they're trying to pick winners amongst universities, if you will, to put them on the global stage. And there are 9 universities in Germany which have become part of this Excellence Initiative. And on top of that, they're also picking winners in terms of clusters of universities and firms to move into areas where the Germans traditionally have not been so notable or successful in economic terms, to broaden the competitiveness of the economy. When you look at the Excellence Initiative, though, something strikes you very hard. And I'm now going back to this point about the tension between innovation and inclusion. The top German research universities, there are around 40 of them, they pretty much enjoy similar sorts of reputation. They're pretty equal, in contrast to, say, the United States or in Britain, where there are some elite universities and then universities beneath that which clearly are not in global terms. And the interesting thing about the German case, and the question here is, from the Excellence Initiative, is whether you will see a hierarchy of research universities such as you find in Britain and the United States. Because if you do, then you'll also get a hierarchy in terms of the social class of those going to those universities. So where you have at the moment enjoyed a kind of equality of reputation in Germany, the question remains as to whether the Excellence Initiative will actually change the structure of the reputation and hierarchy of universities in Germany. So that's what I mean by this tension, if you will, between innovation and inclusion. In Britain, more and more money is going to Oxford and Cambridge, Imperial College, and therefore less is going to other universities. And they are colleges or universities that attract the highest in terms of social class. So that fundamental tension there is one I think we need to be aware of. And this is precisely what I'm saying here, so I'll skip that and come to the conclusion. The conclusion is not a happy one, but I think that unless we face what we think is the way the world is changing and moving, and we won't be able to confront these particular issues and deal with them in an appropriate way. The rhetoric of the knowledge economy simply won't do it. And that evidence is there before our eyes, as I say, in forms of graduate unemployment and indeed underemployment. So the competition for credentials is likely to intensify as more and more families seek to get their children into the top universities. In Britain and the United States, I think you can see now a retreat from the rhetoric of the knowledge economy and a retreat in policies from the idea of the knowledge economy, much more in Britain than in the United States, where there is increasing budget for science research. In Britain, it's being cut by 10%. So these two countries have major challenges in terms of rebalancing their economies. There was a talk given last night by Jack McDougall, which was very optimistic for the United States. I can't say I'm that optimistic about Britain. Germany is in a much stronger position, but there are concerns about issues of equity there, as I've just indicated. So let me finally then say something about the developing world in relation to this thesis. And we don't know quite what the implications of this changing division of labor within the global economy actually means for the developing world. That is still something that we need to talk with experts about and think through. But it's very clear, first of all, that in many developing countries, you need many of the skilled workers that require a university education. You need doctors, engineers, architects, so on and so forth. But at the same time, we wouldn't expect them to earn the kinds of salaries that those at the top of those, and I stress the top, not the bottom or the middle of those occupations in the West, may earn. So we still need skilled workers. It's just that the returns to that skilled work are likely to be far lower in the West and probably lower also in the developing world. But those workers are still required there, and education in the developing world, I think, faces different challenges to the ones that I've set out this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Loudoun, for your excellent presentation. You raised very important issues. If I take one word from your presentation, the tension between innovation and inclusion, if I read you correctly, could be seen tension or trade-off between excellence and equity. I think this is a real issue that we, not only at the higher education level, but at the national government level, to think about when we allocate resources which are in nature scarce to competing uses. But anyway, let's discuss this later on. Now let me invite our next speaker, Professor Wang. The floor is yours, 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kim. To follow with Dr. Loudoun's topic, he presented a picture quite, I would say, quite dark. And what my topic linked to his topic is that we can see that for all countries, we have all, I have to say, same opportunities for government to intervene into education industry through policy. In my session, my presentation is presenting what policy alternative we have to address the issue. So here the picture is, we all know, globalization. It's a great thing because with different countries, we have all kinds of different resources. Natural resources, human resources, they're all different. Without globalization, these advantages of resources cannot be really demonstrated. And globalization, actually, look at Korea. Natural resources, quite limited, but the potential of human resources. Look at the cars driving on the U.S. roads, Hyundai, Kia. That's the advantage from Korea here. So that's the outcome of globalization. However, we're now in a depression, or what we call it, economic downturn. And economic downturn is going to reshuffle this entire world economy and world resources. And education is, in this entire globalized economic downturn, education can play a role. However, education is not an independent variable. It's intertwined with many other key system factors. So here is how I define education policy. It is an instrument that can be devised, designed, developed by government agencies, sometimes even organizations. The role of education policy, I put it here as it can provide resources or provide opportunities or promote fair competitions and motivations for education and related sectors to develop education. From this sense, we can see that the global competition right now taking place is actually a competition among nations' education policy. I'll show that next. The easiest way for education policy for all nations is what? Dump money. That's the easiest way. Well, get people educated. First thing everybody would think need money, investment. That's human capital investment theory says you need to invest money. A few countries, however, in this world can afford that. Last year I was in Bahrain. Oil-rich countries, they got lots of money, dumping. But large portion of countries in this world cannot afford that. So we need to explore alternative ways for education policy play a role and make education better. So here are the list of areas that education policy can play significant role, and for us as educators, as industry leaders, or whatever roles you play, we can, from our perspective, better understand these alternatives and options so that we can make education policy more effective, create more better outcome. Alternative one I see here is all about system. In almost all countries, we can divide education system in two big categories: public system, private system. These two systems can play different role, and government policies can make this two systems do different things, or sometimes doing same thing. For instance, if a policy implemented saying, hey, private sector education can start open to public, and this will create competition between private system and public system. We see lots of cases here in this world right now. For instance, originally I'm from China. I know China's case. In the past, Chinese education policies strictly for public schools, universities. No private university or institute allowed. However, about 10, 15 years ago, governments opened the door. Private university or institute can start operation, and there you have a competition for quality, for students, for funding. So everything started getting better. In U.S. case, public school versus private school. For instance, middle school, they started a voucher system. If parents not satisfied with a public school, you can take your kid to a private school. At the same time, that public school that your kids originally in will have to cut a share for your kids of money, education funding, so that you can take that voucher with some monetary value to a private school. In that case, public school lost funding for one, and then lost students for two. And this will actually create a competition. And there's another situation is that in the US case, government policy can create competition within a system. For instance, in public school in the US, they started public school and charter schools, magnet schools. Charter magnet schools is a different management system. You can pick and choose, go to regular public school or go to charter school, so that funding, student competition, and mostly quality competition started. I'll skip this one and this one as well. Between system and next is learning content. Government policy can intervene to encourage, promote new learning content, because this is the most important part that we are in education. It's all about knowledge, skill, competencies. If government knows the future trend of education or future trend of industry, you can define new content skill area and encourage researchers studies in this area. This is I have a case for US. That was about a decade ago, when we closed to the new century. United States started a big research project looking at what is the required skill and knowledge, competencies that a 21st century worker should have to keep the competitiveness of this nation. And a large body of researchers, practitioners getting together, they made a list of key core competencies, including life and career skills, learning and innovation skills, and information medium technology skills. And now if you check on the website, these skills are readily available. It's public information. And that actually now is guiding lots of education institutes, including primary schools, middle schools, and college universities. And technology is another lever that government can play through policy intervention. How to deliver learning. Now, the online classroom is very popular throughout the United States universities and in some middle school, high schools as well. And learning technology can save cost. That's a key thing that everyone is taking. And also we can combine the different policy levers. And outcome evaluation and assessment is another required policy in many nations. What to measure, how to measure, and what's the consequence of the measurement. And here another, from human resource development perspective, teachers' education. How to develop teachers' competencies for future educational career. And from another higher level is workforce development, lifelong learning policies. And to sum up, with all the policy alternatives, nations now is thinking about, at least from US perspective, is where let's try not to compete, just cope with the competition. Let's try to lead, from competing to leading, and benchmark with the international standards, monitor and assessments would be in this game would be very critical for desired policy outcome. And in short, everything put together, what we're looking for should be creative and innovative policy can actually create education outcome without increasing budget. With limited money investment, we can do more, actually. So policymakers should, in this case, to work with the researchers and research institute to identify those policy alternatives for their own countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for your insightful presentation. It would be good if we can come up with these innovative solutions which do not require additional resources. Everybody wants to hear the innovative solutions. I think this is why we are here for today. With that, I would like to invite our last speaker, Dr. Che. You have 13 minutes, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. It is an honor for me to present many distinguished academics, policymakers, CEOs, and education practitioners. I'd like to speak in Korea because there are excellent interpreters, and then the allowed time for me is very limited. So if you are interested in my research topic, you can read the full text of my presentation on your desk. Let me start my presentation in Korea. 2009년 말부터 OECD 다크의 회원 국가가 됨으로써 이제 한국은 그동안 경제 및 교육 원조를 받던 나라에서 이제 원조를 제공하는 나라가 됐습니다. 이를 전후해서 세계 국내적으로 한국의 경제 발전과 교육의 관계에 대한 관심과 연구들이 많아졌습니다. 특히 이제 경제적인 실증 연구 차원에서 한국의 교육에 대한 투자가 그 경제 발전의 GNP 발전에 얼마나 기여를 했는가에 대한 연구들이 많습니다. 그러나 한국의 그 경제 발전이 실제적으로 어떠한 그 교육과의 메커니즘, 연계되는 메커니즘 속에서 이루어졌는가에 대한 연구는 굉장히 부족합니다. 그래서 이번 제 그 발표에서는 한국의 교육이 교육 확대가 경제 발전과 어떠한 연계를 갖는 그런 메커니즘에 의해서 이것이 이제 제도화됐는가. 그리고 또 하나는 이러한 그 모델들이 이제 80년대 말을 계기로 해서 이제 그 국내의 민주화라든가 세계 경제 환경의 변화를 통해서 혁신 주도적인 인적 자본 형성 체제로의 변화가 이루어지고 있다라고 하는 부분을 강조를 하고 합니다. 이렇게 인적 자본 형성 체제의 변화를 살펴봄으로 인해서 한국의 미래형 교육 체제, 인적 자본 형성 체제를 살펴볼 뿐만 아니라 경제 발전과 민주화를 지향하는 많은 개발 도상국들에게 시사점을 줄 수 있기 때문입니다. 여기 이제 제가 그 분석 틀을 그림으로 이렇게 제시를 했습니다. 이 분석 틀은 급속한 이제 경제 성장 과정에서 교육이 어떻게 기여했는가를 이제 분석하기 위해서 교육 정책의 변화 발전을 정치, 경제, 사회 발전과 연결시켜서 보려고 하는 겁니다. 그래서 4단계의 교육 발전 단계를 경제 발전 단계와 관련시켜서 교육 발전 단계는 어땠고 어떤 전략에 이르렀는가, 그리고 그때의 교육 정책은 어땠는가를 쭉 요약해서 제시를 했습니다. 이를 이제 간략하게 설명을 드리면, 해방 이후 전후 재건기인 60년대까지는 기본 교육 체제가 정립되는 시기입니다. 이때는 특히 이제 대중적 문맹 퇴치 운동이 성공적으로 추진되고 초등교육의 보편화가 달성됨으로 인해서 국민의 기초교육을 통한 인적 자본 형성과 사회화가 이루어지게 됩니다. 이때 이제 강조할 부분은 국민들의 교육에 대한 높은 열의와 독립국가 형성을 위한 국민의 사회화 필요성이 교육 발전의 추동력이 됐다라고 하는 부분하고, 그 다음에는 농지 개혁이 그를 위한 경제적인 토대를 제공했다라고 합니다. 아무리 학부모가 자녀 교육에 대한 열의가 있다 하더라도 경제적인 기반이 형성되지 않으면 제공할 수가 없는데, 농지 개혁이라고 하는 부분이 많은 농민들에게 자녀들의 교육을 제공할 수 있는 물적인 기반을 제공했다라고 하는 부분입니다. 그 다음에 60년대부터 70년대까지 중등교육의 양적 확대기인데 이때는 이제 국가 주도의 인적 자본 형성 체제가 구축되는 부분입니다. 이 부분은 제가 뒤에 다시 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 그 다음에 1980년대부터 90년대까지 초반까지의 시기는 고등교육의 확대기입니다. 이때는 학교 이제 그 초중등교육의 보편화가 이루어지게 되고 90년대 초반에 기술 집약 및 첨단 산업 육성으로 인해서 고등교육에 대한 요청이 있게 되기 때문입니다. 그 다음에 이제 마지막 네 번째 단계는 문민정부 시기에 그 이후 1990년대 중반 이후 현재까지인데 이건 고등교육의 보편화하고 어떤 평생학습의 확대기라고 이렇게 볼 수가 있습니다. 이는 WO 체제의 출범이라든가 외환위기의 경험, 글로벌 시장 경제의 확대, 정부화 이런 것들을 통해서 국가 주도의 국가 발전 체제에 의한 국가형 개발 국가형 발전 경제 발전 모델이 이제 한계에 이르게 되면서 폐기되게 됩니다. 그래서 보다 시장 친화적인 혁신 주도적인 인적 자본 형성 체제를 개발하기 위한 노력이 이루어지게 됩니다. 제가 시간이 이제 제한되기 때문에 이제 그 슬라이드를 스킵을 하면서 하겠습니다. 이 그 그림을 보면 이제 우리가 60년대에 개발국가형 인적자본 형성 체제가 어떻게 제도화됐는가라는 것을 볼 수가 있습니다. 여기 이제 보시게 되면 이제 그 청와대 그 대통령이죠. 이 그 맨 위에 있고 그 다음에 그 밑에가 이제 그 대통령 자문위원회가 있게 됩니다. 그래서 밑에 이제 경제기획원이라고 하는 이제 슈퍼 미니스트리가 있어서 이들이 나름대로 5개년 이제 경제개발 계획 또는 나중에 후에는 이제 경제사회 발전 5개년 계획이 만들어지게 되는데 이때 그거에 의해서 맨파워 플래닝이 이루어지게 됩니다. 그거에 따라서 이제 교육부하고 노동부가 나름대로의 어떤 이제 그 스탠다드를 세팅하고 나름대로 학위를 수여하거나 그 다음에 어떤 이제 직업 훈련에 대한 스탠다드 세팅하고 어떤 그 훈련 자격에 대한 이제 수여를 하게 됩니다. 여기서 이제 개발국가형 인적자본 형성 체제라고 하는 것의 주요 특징은 애시톤 같은 경우는 크게 세 가지를 얘기를 했습니다. 정부의 무역과 산업 정책, 그 다음에 기획 조정하는 강력한 부처, 그 다음에 중앙 정부의 교육과 훈련 제도에 대한 강한 통제를 개발형 인적자본 체제의 특징으로 제시를 했는데 한국의 개발국가 인적자본 형성 체제란 국가가 교육, 훈련, 노동시장을 중앙 집중화된 통제와 계획에 의해 조정하는 데 있어서 주도적인 역할을 하며 사회화의 측면에서 도덕적이고 사회적 규율을 강조하게 됩니다. 이 데이터 부분이기 때문에 또 건너뛰고요. 이 부분을 이제 보시면 한국의 그 교육의 확대가 경제 발전과 긴밀한 연관을 가지고 이루어졌다라고 하는 것을 볼 수가 있습니다. 그 50년대에는 초등교육의 보편화가 이렇게 이루어지게 되고요. 그다음에 60년대, 70년대에는 중등교육의 보편화가 이루어지게 됩니다. 그다음에 80년대 이후에는 고등교육의 확대와 보편화가 이루어지게 되고 이 부분은 나름대로의 경제적인 발전 요구와 긴밀한 연관성을 갖고 이루어지게 됨을 알 수 있습니다. 그 다음에 이제 그 80년대 말에 한국의 이제 민주화 운동의 시기를 겪게 됩니다. 그래서 민주화에 의해서 어떤 시민사회 단체들이라든가 어떤 기업 이런 그 시빌 소사이어티의 영향력이 커지게 되고 국제적으로는 IMF라든가 어떤 이제 그 신자유주의 이런 영향에 의해서 어떤 국가의 그 권한이 마켓이나 어떤 이제 시민사회로 부분적으로 이양이 이루어지게 되고 국가는 어떤 직접적인 통제보다는 일단 이제 코디네이션이라든가 어떤 간접적인 평가와 지원을 통해서 조정하는 역할이 굉장히 중요해지게 됩니다. 이런 상황에서 교육체제의 변화 개혁이 이루어지게 되는데 그것이 이제 531 교육개혁이라고 할 수 있습니다. 531 교육개혁은 이러한 그 경제발전 모델의 변화, 그 다음에 인적자본 형성 체제의 어떤 새로운 그 변화에 맞춰서 교육체제를 새롭게 형성하는 그런 것이라고 우리가 이해를 할 수가 있습니다. 그래서 531 교육체제는 보다 이렇게 마켓 프렌들리 하고 수요 주도적인 그런 이제 그 교육을 강조를 하게 되고, 그 다음에 어떤 그 맨파워 플래닝에 보다 더 어떤 그 교육의 어떤 자율적인 그 부분을 발전을 보다 더 강조를 하게 됩니다. 그 다음에 이제 지방자치라든가 어떤 지방 분권 이런 부분들을 강조가 되고, 학교 교육에서는 다양화, 자율, 그 다음에 책무성 등이 강조를 하게 됩니다. 그리고 나름대로 이제 고등교육의 확대와 동시에 고등교육의 질 제고를 위한 어떤 그 고등교육에 대한 투자 이런 부분들이 많이 강조되게 됩니다. 그래서 이제 한국의 어떤 그 경제 발전과 그 교육 인적 자본 형성 체제의 발전으로부터 저희가 이제 교훈을 벗는다면, 이게 이제 옛날 그 버전으로 되어 있는데요. 제가 그 자료에 보시면 크게 세 파트로 제가 제시를 했습니다. 하나는 효과적인 정책 집행 구조가 필요하다라고 하는 부분입니다. 그래서 이제 제가 이제 새로운 혁신주도 인적자본 형성 체제로의 변화 시기에는 이제 국가적인 차원에서는 인적자원개발회의가 부총리급으로 만들어서 교과부를 중심으로 해서 코디네이션을 하려고 했던 시도가 있었고, 또 현 정부에 와서는 교육과 과학과 기술을 연계하는 그런 이제 어떤 가버넌스 구조, 정부 부처 차원의 가버넌스 구조에 대한 새로운 계속되는 모색들이 있고요. 그 다음에는 이제 기초교육의 그 중요성을 우리가 설명을 할 필요가 있습니다. 특히 이제 21세기에 요구되는 핵심 역량, 예를 들어서 비판적 사고력이라든가 의사소통 능력이라든가 다양한 문화, 사람들과 더불어 사는 능력 등에 대한 교육의 강화가 요청된다고 볼 수 있습니다. 그 다음에 이제 교육의 형평성 및 다양성에 대한 추구가 요구되고요. 그 다음에 이제 안정적 교육 재원의 확보입니다. 이게 이제 초중등 교육 부분에 있어서는 초중등 교육 재정에 대한 안정적 확보가 이루어졌는데, 이제 앞으로에 있어서는 고등교육 재정 지원에 대한 확대가 굉장히 요청되고 있습니다. 그 다음에 또 하나는 이제 교육열의 순기능 강화를 위한 공교육의 질 제고입니다. 한국의 급속한 교육 기회 확대에 기여한 주요한 요인이 어떤 학부모의 교육열이라고 할 수 있습니다. 이러한 학부모의 교육열에 순기능을 살리되 불필요한 사교육비 지출을 최소화할 수 있도록 공교육의 질을 높이는 정책이 요구되고, 이를 위해서는 21세기 인재를 양성할 수 있는 새로운 교사 양성 및 재교육 체제가 요청된다고 볼 수가 있습니다. 그 다음에는 이제 교육 투자와 경제 발전을 연계하는 시스템 구축입니다. 두 번째 부분입니다. 이는 이제 산업화와 민주화의 단계를 거친 지식기반 경제에서는 혁신주도적 인적자본 형성 체제가 요청됨에 따라서 중앙 통제 방식보다는 다양한 부처 및 이해관계 집단과의 파트너십과 연계를 촉진하고 시장 및 시민사회 역할을 확대하는 방향으로의 개혁이 요청된다고 볼 수가 있습니다. 그 다음에 노동 수요의 변화를 고려한 교육 확대 및 질 제고 전략입니다. 물론 21세기에 급변하는 경제사회 환경 속에서 노동 수요의 변화를 정확하게 예측하기는 어렵습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 가능한 한 노동 수요의 변화를 예측하고 그런 수요에 맞는 교육의 확대와 질 제고 전략이 필요하다고 봅니다. 그 다음에 세 번째 부에서는 교육, 고용, 복지 간의 연계 부분입니다. 한국의 경험을 통해 볼 때 교육 투자가 경제 성장과 연계됨으로써 교육이 개인의 소득 증가와 계층 향상은 물론 경제 성장과 사회 통합에 기여하였습니다. 이러한 선순환적 구조는 국민의 교육적 열의를 높이고 정부의 교육 투자를 확대하는 핵심적 요인이 되었습니다. 그래서 이러한 교육과 고용과 복지가 연계되는 선순환적 구조를 만들 필요가 있습니다. 마지막으로는 고용성 증대와 평생학습을 위한 민간산학 파트너십 부분입니다. 한국의 경우 급속히 지식기반 경제로 진입함에 따라 노동시장의 유연화가 가속화되고 전례 없이 빠른 저출산, 고령화 추세로 인해 계속교육 및 재교육을 통한 직업능력 개발 수요가 급속히 증가하고 있습니다. 이에 따라서 평생학습에 대한 경제적, 사회적 요구가 증대하고 있습니다. 이러한 평생학습 체제가 구축되기 위해서는 교육과 훈련의 통합적 접근, 다양한 학습 결과의 인정과 자격 연계, 민간 산업 간 협력이 중요하며 이를 위한 해당 부처별, 간력, 사회 파트너들 간의 파트너십 형성과 네트워킹이 필요합니다. 이상 마치겠습니다.
Dr. Che, thank you very much for sharing Korean experience with us, and also thank you for staying in time, which I think is very important. I, as a chair, I'm tasked to manage time in an efficient manner, so I'm very time conscious. Sorry for the speakers, but now it's time for us to hear from discussions. First, let me invite Dr. King from World Bank. Your comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests. I don't think I've been in a setting where I hear from several people the words passion for education and also education fever. I think education fever is a term that I hope I will be able to hear in many other contexts, especially those that I work in. But this is, I think, a defining difference in Korea. And I think to some extent the presentation we heard from Professor Loudoun about, I think one can summarize his topic as, is there overeducation? And what is the effect of overeducation? So this is, let me focus on two remarks. Being an economist, I would say I would categorize my remarks into two groups. One would be on the supply side, and one would be on the demand side. So on the supply, with respect to skills, for example, and going back to the title of this session, which is Education for an Advanced Society, I think first we have to define what we mean by skills here. And I think we have to recognize, as people who've worked on education, a preoccupation almost completely on skills that are measurable. And the skills that I speak about are the skills that we test. You know, the skills that we have measures, assessments, tests for. And I think that is one of the things that we have to change as we look at the future, is that we know, all of us in this room, I think, recognize that those skills that we often measure are not actually the skills that we may think are the most valuable skills for our youth, for our workforce. So are we going to, in fact, exert more effort and devote more resources to really measuring some of those skills that are going to be needed for the future, for an advanced society? So that's one comment. And I think that when we start measuring those usually unmeasured skills, then we begin to understand the importance of preparing youth, making them more flexible, more adaptable, and more innovative, so that they're going to be prepared for the change, for the crisis that we're talking about for the future. Second, on education policies. In fact, and again, here is the oversupply question. When I think we take out the market forces away from all kinds of decisions about education policy, when we don't consider, in fact, what's the demand from the labor market, where we can define labor market as much broader than a country's labor market, and indeed with globalization, with trade, with migration, the labor market is not just the labor market in a country, it's a much broader concept. But when we take out that information, and feeding back that information into our education policies, and we are totally concerned about, let's say, just planning from basic principles, so to speak, and not thinking about the world that education is going to be playing in, then I think that's when that disconnect happens. I think that's when we get into trouble about oversupply. And I put that in quotes because I think we need to in fact, and I would like to read Professor Louder's book and Professor Brown's book about this about oversupply of education. But I think that is one takeaway I would have from the concern about innovation and inclusion, or I guess that'd be that was the point that was being made here. The third, I think, is that, and this is something that I mentioned yesterday during my talk, is that when we, for those of you including me, who have looked at the measured the returns to education, we don't often look at the enabling the environment in which the education, that the returns are being experienced. In fact, what we find is that if we include measures of the degree of economic freedom in the society, and even also measures of political freedom in society, and there are many organizations now who do provide measures for countries and over time, what we find is that the economic returns to education are actually larger when you have economies that are freer. That means to say more people, the property rights are fair and equitable. There's an even playing field for people. Migration is possible. Information is more accessible. It is in those settings, those economic settings, those societies where education pays off much more. And it is in those settings where the ability of education to provide people with the capacity to adapt to change becomes much more pronounced. And then I would say too that even as we think about the economic benefits from education, and there are many, economic benefits are not the only reasons why we educate our youth. And if we get too focused only on those, we will miss the other social benefits from education. The social and private benefits that have nothing to do with employment, don't have anything to do with earnings. And I think as we build societies, and I talk about even in richer countries where social cohesion, peace, society building, nation building, those are important benefits from education. So I think we also might be too focused on that. So, and finally, I would say for poor countries, I think the message for them is that the fundamental skills from education are going to be very important for their economic growth, their economic development, and for their social development. And I guess for them, for these countries where I work in, where my colleagues work in, we're far from asking the question about oversupply of education. So thank you very much to the presenters.
Thank you, Dr. King. At this point, I'm very much tempted to say a few words before I hand over to next comment. I think you raise very important issues of education and skills development. Yes, the definition of skill, I think you hit the central point of the debate, which is skills. What do we mean by skills? How do we observe and measure skills? There are many unmeasurable dimensions of education outcome. And these outcomes, by the way, are key to the advancing society, not just in the economic area, but also in other areas as well. And regarding the debate about overall education, could it be that it's under demand? Why education has to be just for the existing jobs? Can education be for jobs which are not existent at this moment, but can education create new jobs? I'm just throwing questions to you to think of, for all of us to think about. And lastly, you mentioned this enabling environment, which I think is very important for education benefit to be materialized in any society. We have many barriers for education returns to be actualized. So I think you hit the point, but again, I'm kind of challenging your views as an economist. But why education has to be for education? Can education be for something else? I'm just raising the issue. Sorry for throwing out this question. With that, I'm going to invite Dr. Chek. Can you provide your comments from sustainable development perspective?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's a very nice to meet you all. I understood that there are 3 key points crossing over the 3 presentations. Oh, I would like to express my thanks. It's a really comprehensive presentations. 3 key points was policy, education, and higher education. Especially the Hugh's presentation. It's reminded me one question. What is the purpose of a university? Because university human resource development is closely linked with the society development. And the Greg's presentation is about many things, policy and economic growth and another perspectives. But I was thinking about why we need lifelong learning regarding changing society. And Sang-Dak's presentation is an excellent country case showing quantitative expansion history. I was thinking, recently there were several statistical things. One was about the jobs. Actually, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, they say that they estimate today's learner will change their job 10 or 14 times by 36 years old. Think about that. It's really changing. And the top 10 jobs in 2010, just last year, actually disappeared and actually didn't exist the previous time. So we can think about how our society has changed really quickly. And especially the technical information. We are talking about changing society, changing skills, everything. But do you know what? The technical information has changed, actually doubled change every 2 years. It means that the first year of a university student, their information and the knowledge from university, just when they become the 3rd year, it will be out of dated. So we needed to think about these kind of things. But I was wondering 3 things. Actually, maybe we missed some fundamental issues. There are many Korean audiences here, so I took advantage of my mother tongue Korean for the translated version, because we have 2 versions in English and Korean. And in English version, the title is The Advanced Society. But actually, when you see in Korean version, there is the 지속 가능한 사회. That is actually sustainable society. So I found that it's a different conception. Maybe it reflects us how much we could not define what is advanced society we really need, and maybe some confusion. So we needed to think about this issue, because maybe 500 years ago, even 3 years ago, we had a different concept, or whether we had a different understanding of it. Especially second point that I'm concerned, it's not only for Korean universities, maybe across the world, whether we ignore the global issues, especially about the poverty and education and the environment. Because I'm a UNESCO staff who has a specialty in environment, my specialty is about the education for sustainable development. And recently in Korea, education for green growth is very popular. That's my specialty. So I remind you, actually this kind of education policy, even environment, it's not independent issues. It's influenced each other, all of countries. There are 3 security issues. Actually, not only leading by UN, it's all over countries. One is food and the energy and the water. Why? Because it's a basic demand. And maybe we are talking about the creating jobs too much. Actually, we need it. But I was wondering whether this HR forum or some of education specialists too much provide burden to education sector, because think about that. Even we develop so many numbers of high qualified people, but when they graduate university, if they don't have a job, what's the point for that? Actually, that's why three presentators pointed out the importance of a policy. Actually, without economic policy, I mean the well-developed one, the human resource cannot be developed. So it's kind of a gear, well-designed and well-implemented one. So that was my concern. And let me recall back to my second point about global issues, especially for young people and the young leaders in the universities. They needed to think about their own country, but also their region and the worldwide vision. Think about that. We are in Korea now, and we belong to Asia Pacific. And 60% of poverty people are in Asia, in the Pacific. And when we cannot think about this kind of vision, actually there is no long run the development as well. And a Korean case, as I told you, is an excellent case showing the from quantitative development, and now Korea is concerned about quality issue. Actually, there are 28 million children that are out of school. And when we are in advanced country or developing country, we are easily getting forget of it. But actually, that is linked together. For example, when you go to Indonesia, actually there is a beautiful island, Bali. You know that. And there are beautiful forests. And that kind of maybe you don't think is related to it. But actually when there is some problem, like shifting farmers, the fire cultivation, it causes a forest one, and it linked with the export timbers, and even the fire causes Malaysia's smoke problem. So all these kind of things, policy, education, economic growth, we really need to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chair. Sorry for pushing you to shorten your statement. I didn't realize that there's difference between Korean and English version. Yes, for Koreans, it's not status quo, it's advancement. When we speak about sustainability, I'm sure this is the case for people from other countries. Dr. Wu, may I ask you to provide your insight?
Thank you so much. My special thanks for the organizer of this excellent event and very meaningful event, and especially for the Chairman Kim, who called me into this session at the kind of last minute. Okay, and whatever he says, I obey. That's it. Okay. Although my title now here is kind of OECD, I'm not representing OECD. I'm now working at this OECD as the senior analyst at this Office of Secretary General, but it's on a 2-year temporary appointment. My original affiliation is Korea Development Institute, not Korea Educational Development Institute, so KDI. So I'm an economist. So I just say that I'm very pleased to have these 3 excellent papers, okay, from different perspective and different accent somehow. It's very profound, and especially I found Professor Lauder's paper very, very thought-provoking, and something we have to think, because we are probably kind of over supplied with all the good things about this knowledge-based economy. So whatever you come up with more education, then you'll find a good job that will be better for everybody within the country and around the world. But he challenges that kind of common statement from the very fundamental point of view, and say that basically the supply may not create demand automatically. Okay, so more education may not lead to a better job. Okay, so this is very much a strong challenge to what is called the Say's law. Say's law, Francisco Say's law, very much doctrine of the dictum in the economics. Say supply and will create demand in the long run. He says there is not. And the second, he said that in the time of recession, that there will be some serious risk of underinvestment in education or human capital, especially for someone in the underprivileged status in the economy. So, in this time of recession and economic downturn, you'll have the risk of lesser investment and greater disparity. That's the way I interpret that, which I guess is very much a realistic diagnosis of what is going on. And although he analyzed pretty much in ages ago instance, then that is this maybe as much true and applicable to the ongoing recession. Okay? But Professor Wang said that although that there may be that kind of very fundamental problems, that the problems may be resolved somehow through the better management of the policy, and especially in times of tight budget, you may not necessarily need that much money. You can improve process, you can improve system, then you can get better result, possibly or arguably for everybody. And so, we have this Dr. Choi's presentation in Korea. It's kind of exceptional. No serious oversupply of education in the long run. And no such a sharp trade-off between equity and efficiency, or the growth or distribution. And through what? A kind of very effective policy or the political leadership from the beginning and somehow through 1980s and now. So here is the story. I found it very interesting, but I don't have enough time to go to details for all this. But I said already some point have been captured by Liz and also Dr. Choi. This is the first question, oversupply of education. I guess it's first is the conceptual problem, how to measure oversupply. But in economics, there is nothing oversupply and is undersupply. It's kind of good equilibrium and bad equilibrium. Okay? So in good equilibrium, okay, we have just matching of whatever oversupplied and overdemanded something. Okay? But this is a technical something. But the way I say it, Say's law is something we have to address fundamentally. In the long run, okay, whatever supplied will be accommodated, utilized, and that means that there will be no such kind of shortage of demand. But in the short and in the intermediate term, there will be a sharp mismatch between the supply and the demand. And I guess that's the point of Professor Loudoun. And ages ago, this mismatch might have kind of sustained such a long period of time. But these days, we know we have a better policy tool and instrument, so this type of the problems can be handled the better way, the way we hope. And second, about this growth and disparity, or the efficiency and equity disparity issue, that this also is a stark reality, even in Korea these days. Korea is suffering from so-called lowered growth amid rising disparity. So this is a structural trend which has been here for the past 10 years, more than that. We don't know how to get out of that. Surely education will be a very important policy measure in this regard, but cannot be easily handled. So finally my point is that a policy measure here is, I guess I'm very glad to have my old friend, the Harry Petrinos, and I love his terminology of, we have two types of reforms. One is efficiency reform, the second is this access reform. The access reform is to provide more opportunity to everybody. So no trade-off, so nobody yields for another. But efficiency reform usually is that someone must give up for this greater efficiency of society, economy, whatever. But here, although this Professor Wang said that we can attain a greater efficiency through better policy, but usually that doesn't come that easy. At OECD, I'm now leading the project, the Making Reform Happen. So how to make some reforms to materialize. It's not the what to reform, it's how to reform. And I say, in the policy reality, in most of the cases, you have to combine this access reform and this efficiency reform to kind of resolve this kind of contradiction and conflicting in the interest of stakeholders. So, going back to the Korean case, now the Korea's, this kind of economic or educational development have been so successful in the old days because under kind of authoritarian regime and following a very strong centralized leadership. But our now challenge is, as a society has become more democratized and the economy has been more advanced, then more difficult it has become to make some kind of reforms you want to make. So we need a new model of reform making, consensus building, and sharing information and developing strategic information. So this model of making reform is kind of something new. We need to build for the new model of education and which can respond well to the new challenge of economic society. So the final point, not the what to reform, how to reform is something we have to take into account more. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I'm glad that I asked you to join the panel. I think you raised a very valid point. Perhaps I stand here. Well, according to the planned program, the time is already up, but I would propose to spend 10 more minutes because we have 20 minutes break. But if you choose to leave the room, that's fine. But in terms of doing justice to distinguished participants for your patience and waiting, I would propose to spend 10 more minutes. Is it okay with everybody? Okay. So I'll take a few questions from the floor. Okay. Harry and the gentleman in the second row. Please introduce who you are and 1 minute comments, question.
Thank you. Harry Petrinos, World Bank. I couldn't resist coming to this panel given the names, and I'm glad I came. Very good presentations, and I particularly enjoyed the discussions. Coming back to Dr. Wu's comments, I wanted to make one point about human capital theory. I also couldn't resist that. The connection between investment in education and subsequent returns and the connection to Say's law, I don't follow. My understanding of human capital theory, or the connection between investment in education and subsequent returns, is that there are conditions that need to be met. There has to be a growing economy. There has to be a market for those skills. And I think in many countries this doesn't exist. Yesterday there was a graph in one of the plenaries that showed regions where the demand for skills was in undersupply according to employers. And I noticed that the region with the highest level was the region with the lowest returns to education, which wouldn't make sense in economic terms unless there's something wrong with the market for human capital. Much of the estimates of the returns to schooling in recent years are that the returns are actually increasing, despite tremendous increase in the supply of skills. But the reason for that is exactly what Professor Loudoun showed. It's the increasing returns at the higher level, and particularly for those upper quantiles. This is evident not just in the US and UK, but even some middle-income countries in Latin America. This is both encouraging and discouraging, and I think a lot of this has to do with the need for specific policies, which all of the discussants mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. The gentleman behind.
Hi, my name is David Se from Hanyang University. And since we are already in the overtime mode, I'll skip my comments and acknowledgments and go straight to the question, which I think many of you had overlapping points. My question is that what might be such skills that would be in demand in the future that would in fact create currently non-existent jobs? And I would love to hear one or two ideas from everybody up there. Thank you.
Perhaps one more question from the floor. I can see you. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yun Kim, Far East University. I think theme of this forum, and for that matter, this session is global human resource, open, ready for tomorrow. And this particular session is education, role of education pathway toward advanced society. And a lot of discussions about policy, investment, return. I think my comment or question is, we have to look at what human resource development refers to. Are we talking about developing people's full potential of how far they can learn or what kind of skills they develop? Are we trying to help them to develop, or what? And investment for whom? And return for whom? I think in this open world, we invest in a lot of people. They don't necessarily seek their employment in their own country, because international is global. Many people were educated, they get jobs elsewhere around the world whenever they are open. In the future, in my view, that will be the case in the global. Second is talk about the return, and a lot of high proportion of the people educated, they don't get the jobs. Then are there specific, what's wrong with the education? Are we producing people really educated for what we intended to do? Mismatch, someone mentioned about. Why don't we focus more on these findings of these studies? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps one more, just quickly, gentleman over there.
To save time, allow me to ask a layman's question. To save time and since the excellent interpretation available. My name is Lee Sang-sol, and Lee is my family name. My question is, don't you think education is one of the best way and most inexpensive way to achieve a maximum economic development? If so, to what extent and to what rate, in your view? What would be profit and loss statement and or cost and benefit look like? Kindly provide brief answers by anyone concerned would be appreciated.
Thank you for the question. I don't know how to proceed from here. Perhaps Professor Loudoun. Quick and terse, yeah.
Thanks for those questions. I mean, I think they're really interesting questions, and also for the comments from the panelists, and I'll just say a couple of things about those as well. Lurking behind some of these questions is the question of should we only see education for economic purposes? And the answer to that is emphatically not. And so I think that Elizabeth was very helpful in making that point. Coming from an economist, that's excellent. So education, of course, has potentially much wider benefits than just for the economy. And in my book with Phil Baum, we go at pains to talk about that in our final chapter. So having said that, then what about the connection between the economy and jobs and education? And there was a question about skills for non-existent jobs. And this really underlies the kind of faith economists have in an equilibrium, in a good equilibrium, in which case, in the long term, somehow the skills and education people have will be equated to the jobs. Now, in Korea, I can see why that faith might be why you'd have that faith. And the reason for that, of course, is that before your economic takeoff, you had a large oversupply of graduates. And they then assisted in the economic takeoff of this particular country. That's absolutely correct. I'm not sure whether in the present situation, given the nature of global production and distribution and innovation, that still applies. I guess that's an open question. And if education is to be pressed into the service of the economy, then economists' faith, and it is a faith in equilibria, then I'm also hopeful that that would be the case. I'm not sure it is.
Thank you.
Can I respond to?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Loudoun. Professor Wang?
Yes, I'd like to respond to the last question first. Education may not be the best way for economic development, but it is a fundamental way for economic development. And based on my own experience, I worked at Motorola University, Motorola, and GE Learning Solution, General Electric. Based on my own experience, those companies hire employees with some fundamental educational background. And then organizations, companies have their own skill requirements, competency requirement. Once they hire employees, they'll train them. Without fundamental education background, you have no way to make things happen once employed. So that's the key thing here. Here is the relationship between education and human resource development in organizations. And the second question was about one of my research area. What is the human resource development? Who are we developing? What is the education? Who are we educating? Related to my first response, it's similar. In organizational setting, we're developing human resources. However, the fundamental education is for a broader, much broader audience.
Thank you, Professor Wang. And Dr. Che and Dr. King, Dr. Che, just briefly, your comments, please.
I think it is very difficult to meet the demand of labor market because the Korean government introduced the university established standards in 1990s. Suddenly, surprise of expansion of higher education has been pointed out as having lower its quality and caused the social problem of college educated young unemployment. So government, after the economic crisis, have pursued structural reform to raise quality of higher education. In this regard, I think it is very important to consider the demands of labor market when expanding higher education.
Thank you. Dr. King?
Thank you, Guangzhou. Thanks very much for the questions. Only one point to make, which is that I think when we mention higher education, it seems like a sort of a big blob. Of course, it isn't. There are different degrees, different types, and I think that is actually an important point for education policy, which is that the demands for higher education are different. So you have some for some people, what they really need and what they want would be a 4-year degree, and some could be a 2-year degree, and some would be much more general than others. And I think the education system that probably would be best to meet the demand for the future, that was one question that was asked earlier, is one that has that is much more diversified to be able to meet different needs. But I think that in some cases what happens though is that even if a system has different services, everybody knows that the quality and that the resources go to one type, which is the more general 4-year course. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of education systems. It's when you have a much more diversified set of services, but that the quality should be there so that those who do choose not the 4-year university kind of education would still feel confident that in fact the services that they are getting are services that are of good quality and will give them value. So I think diversity in the higher education system, and at the same time also quality, so that indeed the education system can get across a very important information, which is that different kinds of higher education would be useful for different uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth and Mia and Dr. Wu.
Let me recall the first question because there is no response so far. So regarding what kind of job demands in the future, definitely I want to say it's green jobs, because all of the environment issues penetrate into every sector now, and by the end of day of the earth, environment issue cannot be away from us. So that is it. And regarding the world trend, it's not only for the technology part. It's about the social science, even economics. For example, nowadays there is some trends about the green MBA. So some people say, oh, why it is related to green jobs? But actually it is. So this can be. So we needed to think about what kind of trend and what kind of our future needs linked with the environment. And quickly to touch upon the second question, is okay. So regarding education, what about the cost and efficiency? Actually, education is very powerful when we think about impact. Problem is, it takes time. And the policymaker decision, people think it takes too much, so we don't want to put much effort on it. But it is, we need it. Then what is the shortest cut? Actually, leader development. So regarding environment, there are some countries that really focus on environmental leaders program and such kind of things, because within a short time, they will affect on the policy. As I told you, policy education is a gear. So that was my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Che. Dr. Wu, finally.
Nothing to add about this, the contents. Just one thing to kind of promote my project, Making Reform Happen. This is the OECD's horizontal project, a 3-year project. We are now toward the conclusion of the first stage. So in the end of November, they will have the big conference at the OECD, the Paris headquarters, and this Making Reform Happen. And I said this is more about this how to get there than the what to. So, and what are the barriers for making successful reform, the technical barriers and the political barriers. And this studies covered 9 policy areas, including education. We also have this labor, pension, environment, and the fiscal, tax, and product market, and something like that. So it's a kind of the first of this very encompassing and cross-cutting endeavor. And for this, this is the KDI OECD joint venture, and the KDI team will come up with its own study of Korea's experience of how to make reform in 9 different sectors. So this will be a pretty interesting event for you, not only for the education, some other areas. OECD.org/MRH. And if you can contact me for the further information, I'll be very happy to reply and to have this, invite you to this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Well, I don't know what to conclude. I think in the beginning, I thought education may be more or less obsolete and retarded, but I have now a ray of hope, which is that education has a role to play despite all these changes. But if I may use this opportunity, like Dr. Wu, the UNESCO office in Bangkok, together with the World Bank, Beth and her colleagues, we are working on assessment, benchmarking. Actually, this is World Bank initiative. The aim is to assist the countries, the policymakers, to assess their situation in relation to other countries in competitive sense, where they are in terms of skills development and learning assessment. Just for your information, I don't have this web link. Beth, if you have. www.
Yeah, I think it's just the World Bank site and then /education. Thank you. Thank you for the advertisement.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for us to thank our distinguished speakers and discussants. Please join me in thanking them. And thank you very much for your patience, very engaging, very active participation. Thank you very much. This is the end of the session. Thank you.